is our Do Something series. This is week 2, and it's one of those things that they had in here basically 3 or 4 verses. And to me, it wasn't enough to really justify what's going on. And I could probably give you kind of the Wikipedia synopsis, Cliff Notes version of it, or we could read it like old school people reading newspapers. And to let you know, but here, so we're going to read it all together. If you got a Bible app, follow along with someone who does. If you don't have a phone, grab someone who does. So you're going to share, do some splitsies. Make sure you follow along in the story as I read it. Here's what you do need to know. Israel follows a pattern where everything's good. Then there's some disobedience. They have some bad leaders. They get sold off into slavery, get overrun by another group of people. They take God's people captive. We have bad times for a while. They get released. They go back. They have good times. Then they start disobeying again. And we have a cycle, and that's your Old Testament. Now, that's part of your Old Testament that happens over and over and over again. When the Babylonians take God's people, know that King Nebuchadnezzar is one bad dude. The dude in North Korea thinks he's bad tonight. He's got nothing on King Neb, okay? King Neb doesn't play, and as you'll see, when you don't obey King Neb, bad things happen to you, including that he's just going to build a big furnace and throw you in it. And that's where we part of our story. So you guys know Daniel. You know Daniel and the lions did. Perhaps you've never heard this story. If you haven't, it'll be a good times for you. If you have, I want you to pay attention tonight with the eyes that we mentioned last week. Last week's challenge in week 1 was to open our eyes and to see injustices with God's eyes. Tonight's challenge goes further to this. Those challenges and those injustices that we're supposed to see in God's eyes, what happens when those injustices start to happen to us? How do we respond? So here we go. Chapter 3, we're going to hit it head on all the way through. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 60 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the stirrups and prefects and the governors, the counselors, treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, all the officials, you get the point, of the province to come dedicate the image in his image to King Neb that he set up. All right, so we're talking about homeboy's the perfect narcissist set up here. King Nebuchadnezzar had set it up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sounds of the horn, pipe," somebody know that one, lyre, turgan, harp, all the good stuff, bagpipes, have bagpipes in the Old Testament, that's pretty cool. Every kind of music, you're to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. So when we think about images, we think about statues, we think about idol worship, this is where we get it from. We kind of have a different way of doing that in the New Testament. We call those professional football stadiums, professional baseball stadiums, skyscrapers. We worship images, but differently when it comes to idols. This is a golden image, huge golden image. Verse 6, "Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And therefore, as soon as you hear the people and hear the sound of all the music, all the people, nations, and language fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Neb had set up." So crazy times, crazy setup here. Let's keep going. "Therefore, at that time, a certain Chaldean came forward," probably butcher that, "maliciously accusing the Jews." So here's our first injustice happening tonight. "They declared King Neb, 'O king, live forever,'" total suck up. "You, O king, have a decree. Every man hears the sounds and every kind of music. They fall down, they worship the golden image. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the burning fiery furnace." So what's the injustice? Yes, there you go. So you have injustices happening. I'm going to go a little bit further that has to do with something, verse 12, with the color of their skin. What's wrong with the boys? They're Hebrews, they're also aka Jews. If you're Hebrew, you're Jewish. They're Jews. So you've got injustices happening, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There are certain Jews, why they gotta go with the Jew word there, who have appointed over the affairs of the providence of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Things are about to get really hairy for them. All right, verse 13. Then Neb, in furious rage, commands them to be brought forward. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, It is true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up. Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, every kind of music to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? So King Neb is trying to give them a second chance before the injustice. They're brought forward simply because they don't obey the same God that he does. Who is his God? Not a trick question. What's the image made of? Of himself. His God is obviously himself in his own image here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if it be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face was changed against them. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more hot than usual. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind them and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and their garments, and they were thrown into the furnace. So this should be like game over. Quickly game over. Because the king's order was urgent and the fiery furnace was overheated, the flames of the fire killed the men who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the burning furnace. Then King Neb was astonished, rose up in a haste, and he declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to him, True, O king. And he answered back, I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the sons of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace and declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. They came out from the fire, and the Satraps, prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads were not singed, their cloaks were not harmed, no smell of fire had come upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's commands, yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make this decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. One of those stories I couldn't do justice without reading to you guys. What happens tonight? What happens in our week study of this Do Something series when all the stuff that we see around us And we talked about this last week. We're actually privileged as a group in here. We had a hard time last week coming up with things we could see. Perhaps you weren't truly honest with me. Maybe not. But what happens when all those injustices that we see on the news, all those things that happen throughout history that we read in our history books, what happens when they start to happen to you tonight? Someone do me a favor and answer me a question for those who've taken U.S. history so far. How many world wars have there been? 2. What brought us into the second conflict? Pearl Harbor. Thank you. You're going to make my point tonight. I'm going to argue that there was one great war divided by 20 years, but I digress. And I'll explain that later. So you all know the story. You've heard of Pearl Harbor. Is there anything part of your books that happened to the United States citizens who were Japanese in this country after Pearl Harbor and the war? Interesting. Does that make your history books? I'm curious. All right. Was there certain things happening to God's people in the country of Israel that makes your history book still in World War II? What do we call it? I know. Certain thing happened to God's people in World War II from Germany. It started an issue over there. What happened to God's people, we call it?
The Holocaust.
Thank you. Yes. The Holocaust. Are you aware that that is being written out of your history books?
No, it's still
Israel, Jews. Say.
I know what I was thinking of.
It is the Holocaust. Remember, injustices to people based on the color of their skin have been happening since the beginning of time. Here we see Jews. We see Babylonians not getting along. These guys are not of the same backgrounds. They're not of the same skin color. They're being accused of not worshiping the same way that another people group is worshiping, and the one that people group wants them to worship just so happens to make up all the rules, got lots of money and lots of gold, to the point where he decides to make an image that looks just like him, which is interesting, to bow down in. What happens for us? What do we do when the tables are turned and basically we're the ones facing the injustice? Look to the Daniel chapter 3s of the Bible to know whether you've been discriminated against for your skin color, you've been treated like you were less because of maybe your family's finances tonight, held back because of your gender, or maybe that might happen to you, considered less important because of something you have absolutely no control over. Look to Daniel chapter 3 and remember that not only did they go into the furnace, God didn't stop them from going into the furnace. The king Nebuchadnezzar said himself he saw how many in the fire? 4. When they came back out, how many was there? 3. And not anything on them was burned, no smell of smoke at all. When you experience injustices, remind yourself and know that you do not have to face them alone. God was with them in the fire. He didn't keep them out of the fire. He was with them in the midst of going through the fire themselves. There is debate among scholars still to this day. There's no doubt in my mind who sat and who walked in the fire that night or that day. The same one that faced Joshua before the battle. Some form of what we'll call a pre-incarnation of Christ. What that looks like in the Old Testament is unique, very unique. From a warrior to another Hebrew Jewish boy walking around a burning fire that night, which is very interesting. When we face injustices that happen to us, know that we don't face them alone. God is always with us when we're going through issues. God cared about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and made sure they weren't alone in their suffering that day for injustice. Did this change things eventually for them? Yes. Did the laws change as a result of this injustice? Yes. But don't miss what happened even while they were suffering. God cared for them in the midst of the fight. It's going to be a few years later before the Jews in history go home. Daniel's going to have a lot to do with that and his relationship that he has with this king. Maybe tonight, as you think through the injustice thing, hey, injustices haven't happened to me as much because I know that I'm perhaps a little guilty tonight of being a part of it. And what do I mean by that? You've laughed along when you've heard some kind of joke that might have to be against someone else of a different color. You've watched people get bullied and said nothing. You've listened to music that disregards the opposite gender, or shopped at stores that use child laborers to create their products. We've all been guilty of it, participating in the injustice whether we realize it or not. I'm currently, I'll keep this tame for Shannon in the back right there. I'm currently in a personal feud with one of the NBA players who they decided to ask his political opinion on everything currently with his Nike contract and child laborers, as if I care what an NBA player thinks. However, the rest of the country likes him, so we'll keep that to myself. And think about it. Does he think that his $1 million Nike contract excludes him from participating in the injustice? I own 2 pairs of Nikes. Did I think about it before I bought them? No, I didn't. And it's just as easy as that to commit what we would consider an injustice, knowing that where Nike shoes come from. Now, unless you went and got out cotton and fabric from Hobby Lobby tonight and sewed those together very Old Testament style of you, and it made sure it was all cotton and no polyester and nothing else on it tonight, then you've technically broken the Old Testament law. But that may be a different story. The Old Testament law simply says nothing that isn't cotton should be woven together for God's people to wear. Is it still there? Question for you guys tonight to consider: two things. Know that when injustices do happen to you, God is always with you. That we should be there for each other, and know that it's as simple as Nike shoes to commit injustices and not even realize it. But when we do realize it, we should be able to grow from our mistakes in the past. And I say that as a nation who has a hard time learning and listening from their own history. My parents, my grandparents should have solved the racial equality issue in this country years ago and haven't. Why? Because we're fallen creatures. It's as simple as that. There's always something in us that propels us as we compare to the next brother or sister that's next to us, and it's so easy for us to commit those and not even realize it. But will you learn tonight when you do realize what you've done? Will you be better the next time when you hear the joke? See someone that's getting bullied. Choose not to listen to certain things or watch certain things, knowing that it's for your good anyway, not to put garbage there in your mind. Let me pray for you.